I so it is being recorded.
I just did something. I don't know if
Okay.
it'll work. So Mel, I'll turn it over to you. But before we begin, if I can ask everyone to mute their lines, Mel, Chris, Jordy, and Micah will be the only initial speakers on this call until they open it up for questions. So Mel, I'll turn it over to you. But if everyone else can mute their lines at this time.
What do we do to mute our lines?
It's
What
it's on
numbers?
your phone. So
No, no,
if
no. There's usually a star
So
something.
this is not an operator moderated call. This is the old-fashioned way call in. So
Okay,
hopefully
thanks.
you can figure that out on your phones. But if not, be a mouse.
Right, because as
Thank you,
many of
Mel.
us
I
can.
turn it over to you now.
Okay, good evening, everyone, and thank you for taking this valuable time to be together with the Advocacy Committee. Our charge is to help our chapters be more effective in supporting the UN through the Better World campaign. And in that respect, I'd like to turn it over to Jordy Hanneman, who's going to give us an update on the defunding bill that's been introduced. Jordy?
Hello, everybody. Greetings from Washington. It's been a very crazy time here, but I want to let you know that I'm fired up, and maybe because I haven't really slept in 3 days, or that we were all here till 1 a.m. last night. But this is a challenging time, but an exciting time, and every organization, every kind of entity, I think, faces a time where there are external events, and there are those who try to use that to sideline you, and we're here to say no, we're not going to let that happen. We're not going to go quietly into the good night, and we're going to make the case for the UN. So, in terms of the specifics and the brief background, so the UN, as we all know, has always had a target. That expanded though with the late December vote in the Security Council on Israeli settlements, and really for those who are not fans of the UN, they see this as a prime opportunity, but certainly there is greater frustration, and we understand that. And regardless of one's views on the issue, there are those who are saying, look, the UN is responsible for this, and so what we're saying is, as Chris and others have kind of talked about in the past, there are times when the UN is the actor, and there are times where it's the stage. In this case, it was a forum. It was a forum for member states to bring up this issue. The U.S. in particular, due to a number of different reasons, but obviously abstained on the vote. The settlements resolution passed 14-0, and we're here now. And in the wake of it, there's certainly anger at the Obama administration, but there are those who are targeting the UN. There's been a number of different kind of resolutions. Today, what we saw, though, was a bill from our good friend Senator Ted Cruz from Texas, which would completely defund the UN. All assessed contributions, all voluntary contributions would be cut off. All contributions to specialized agencies, the World Bank, would be cut off until the Security Council repeals this resolution, which, as we know, is not going to happen. Now, normally that would be a challenge, but Senator Cruz is known to take extreme views. What makes this more difficult is that Senator Lindsey Graham was joined him in this, and they were on TV today talking about it. And this is a challenge, as you know, from lobby days and just our outreach. Senator Graham is the chair of the State Foreign Operations Subcommittee on the Senate side, meaning he's responsible for funding the UN. In the past, he's been a strong supporter of international affairs budget. And while he sometimes calls out the UN, has always acknowledged the importance of funding the UN. So it's certainly a challenge to have him on this bill. Israel is a sensitive issue for him. He has been known to kind of be angry and blow off steam. This is, I would say, the angriest he has been. We have excellent relations with his staff and met with them, and they have made it very clear that the staff have talked to him and tried to kind of walk him back, but he is angry and is in punishment mode. So this happened today, and so certainly unfortunate. What I would say on the positive side is we have dealt in the past with anti-UN bills. We've talked in the past about like the Ross-Lehtinen bill. Those bills are 50 pages long. They're they cut here and they withhold here and they do this, and the messaging can be a little bit of a challenge. Here, the messaging and the bill are crystal clear. The bill is less than a page. It basically says we will cut off all funding, again, to the UN. Voluntary contributions. That's no funding for UNHCR, no funding for WFP, no funding for UNDP, for UNICEF. And understand, in voluntary agencies, the U.S. is in many cases 30, 40, or 50% of the funding. So it is not hyperbole to say that millions will suffer. Kids will die because of this. Bed nets won't be delivered. I mean, kids won't be vaccinated. All sorts of bad things would happen if this would come. It would cripple every single peacekeeping mission, the political mission. So this legislation is very clear, and the consequences would be devastating. On a messaging side, that at least makes it very clear for us when we go in for the outreach that we need to do is to be very clear and say, I hope you do not support defunding the UN. This would lead to the U.S. having to exit the UN, as well as the consequences I talked about it. So we have a clear charge in front of us. It is a very bad bill, but it's an opportunity to be very clear and stand up for the UN and saying the UN does a number of things. And in this case, kind of we've always talked about in the past, about the different issues, and you may care about this issue, you may care about X or Y, climate or refugees or human trafficking. In this case, whatever the issue you care about, it will be severely impacted, if not crippled, if not the program ended with this bill. Human trafficking, assistance for refugees, vaccinations, housing, food, peacekeeping, political missions, whatever it is, it would be severely impacted by this legislation. So it gives you an opportunity to talk about whatever is the issue that's most personal, but you can talk about it in very dramatic ways because it is the truth. This is the situation we're facing. So this is legislation that was just introduced today, and so we'll talk a little bit about the outreach for it. But what we really need to do is to get the word out. There's a lot of frustration with the UN now, and there's a feeling that and this is something that we've faced in the past, that when an anti-Israel resolution comes up, the viewpoint is to kind of color the entire UN as flawed, as broken, as needing to be walked away from. And so, we could talk about this resolution as being a challenge, but this, was a decision by member states. But the notion that we would kind of end our involvement with all the other things the UN does just doesn't make sense. So that's where we are right now. I would say in terms of outreach, and again, we'll go into this, but the other unique aspect of it and why outreach will be critical earlier than normal is normally we have kind of two inflection points. We have the summer when you all are here for Lobby Day. That's when the appropriators are meeting, and it's critical to make our voices known. And then in the kind of fall, October, November, December is when the final bill is hashed out. This year we have three inflection points. We have both the summer and kind of fall, winter, but we also have April. So because of the election, what happened is instead of passing a bill to fund the government for the entire year, they funded it until April 28th. So that means over the February, March, April timeframe, appropriators members, Senator Graham, will be crafting a bill to fund the government for the next 6 months. So that will be an opportunity for them to cut the UN. So it is very important that we really use now. I mean, February and March will be vital to go in and talk to members and saying, we care about the UN. We fully support it. We want it fully funded. Defunding the UN would have devastating consequences for the U.S. It is not in Israel's interest, and it's not in the interest of our allies. And so we hope you will support it. To those who are, there are some who don't like the UN at all, but there are those who have issues with the UN. But this is a bridge too far. We need to let them know, Congressman, Senator, I understand some of your challenges with the UN, and we want to work for you. The new Secretary General is a reformer. Let's help him. But this bill is a bridge too far. And for our supporters, we've talked in the past about what can we do. What can we do if the member is a supporter? Now is when we need these individuals to speak out if they're a champion. I mean, we need them to man the ramparts. This is a critical time. We have faced challenging times in the past, in the 90s with Jesse Helms, in 2000s with John Bolton, and right now. And this is a time we need them to speak up. So if you're talking to an office that's a supporter, it is critically important to say we need you to talk to your colleagues, to publicly make comments about the value of the UN. So let me end there and just end also with a thank you and say I'm so glad that we have this fighting force because we need it, and you all are seasoned pros at this, and I know we'll be working together closely. But this is a critical time, and we're glad to be manning the ramparts together.
Thank you, Jordy.
Sure.
I appreciated that, and I think we look forward to having messages from you or UNA about the priority members besides our own members. So we'll be ready to do that. Chris, would you take a turn here? We'll take questions at the end of our time together. But Chris, would you talk about the advocacy toolkits online?
Certainly. Thank you. And I think that was great preparation by Jordy. Every time we get into these discussions, I end up thinking back to a quote that's been in a lot of articles that probably everyone has read on this line, which is a quote that the late Richard Holbrooke said when Congress would make these efforts to defund the UN. Now, they never made in his lifetime an effort as severe, as catastrophic as this defunding bill, but they made others. And he used to always say that those efforts to punish the UN for something that happened in the Security Council, something that happened in the General Assembly, something that we didn't like, it went against our values, it was biased against Israel, but there's something in it that we didn't like. It was like being a fan who, when the Knicks lose, you go out and you punish Madison Square Garden. And how ridiculous that was, because nothing that you do to punish that stadium is going to change the outcome of the game, and the game's going to continue. It's just going to move on to a different venue in a different stadium. Nothing that you do to trash that stadium changes the outcome, changes the future, and that's what's happening on this. And the difference is that because this bill is so severe, cuts everything, as Jordy said, UNICEF, everybody. There are 80 million people sitting in the bleachers of that stadium that this bill is designed to set a torch to. That's 80 million people. Those are just the people who receive food assistance from the UN. But think about anything else. It's a fire that if it gets lit, the embers touch everything we care about. As Jordy said, no matter what your issue is that brings your passion to the point that you're willing to commit to be a UNA USA member, to give your time, your talent, to sign up to be a member, whatever it is, it's all under threat. And that is why the messaging in this toolkit is pretty simple, It's not like some of our other kind of preparatory materials that we have for our lobby days in the past, where we might be covering 7 different issues and providing one-pagers for each issue. This is a simple, focused digital toolkit that you will all be receiving. It's going to be part of our the digital newsletters and all the other outreach that we give to you, arriving imminently. And all it does is it provides 3 different sets of platforms to assist you in making this case of the utter insanity of defunding the UN, the utter insanity of this decision for our interests, for our specific national interests as Americans, and for our values as people. So it is a social media toolkit for those of you, for chapters who have an assigned person in your leadership who updates your Facebook page. These are great messages, tools, graphics to use to explain how ridiculous that is, including graphics with the updated poll numbers showing that 67% of Americans want us to pay our dues in full on time, and 88% of Americans want us to work with the UN to address global challenges. So that's designed really to be social media tools for all members. We would love to have all members using their Facebook feeds or Twitter feeds or whatever their preferred platform is to share this messaging to reach as broad of audiences as possible, but particularly our chapters who have their own platforms and networks. Then the next piece is just specific messaging, really about how you should talk to your elected leaders and also your friends and family, for that matter, on why Congress must oppose efforts to withhold funding to the United Nations. And it gives those kind of specific figures on the number of people who are desperately dependent on the UN for their basic safety and dignity, and gives some backing paragraphs. It's really only about 2.5 pages or so. But once again, focus like a laser on defunding, because that is the challenge before us. And then finally, there's an op-ed template, similarly on defunding. Now, what's interesting on that op-ed template is we've provided these in many occasions in the past. And often, because there's a limited appetite in a normal news cycle for information on the UN, for a local person to just stand up and tell you why they care about the UN. It takes some real push for us to get those through editorial boards or get letters to the editor printed. Often it is a labor-intensive effort where it's our own staff pitching it over and over again just to get it placed in a few places around the country. The UN is front and center in the news cycle right now. It's on Fox News in the morning. It's MSNBC. It's everywhere. So this template, if you take it and use it and you put your own name behind it, in your role as advocacy lead for your chapter or working with your chapter president, however you want to pursue that, the chances of this being taken and published in your local paper are far higher than anything that we've ever put out in years. So those are the 3 platforms. Those are the tools, all designed for that defunding message. But let me pause there, and we can move on with the agenda.
Super. Thanks, Chris. The attachments that were sent by Rachel this morning contain 2 PDF files. I believe they're the same files. They just feature different parts of it. So it actually has the entire toolkit on either of those links, just for those of you looking at the resources. Speaking of strategies, Micah, would you like to take us through organizing an in-district meeting and what to say?
Absolutely. Thanks, Mel, and thanks everybody for for joining us tonight. Some of you have done, a lot of you have done in-district meetings before. Obviously, a lot of you have come to DC and done the meetings here. What we're asking you to do, and we'll be doing in an email as well with some more information, is to either call or preferably speak directly with your member of Congress, preferably a Senate office, but a representative as well. We have 4 W's that go along with that message. First of all, if you haven't scheduled a meeting before or tried or reached out to an office before, it's very easy. You can either go to house.gov or senate.gov to find your member of Congress, your senator. You either put in your state or your zip code, and you can find them quite easily, find their phone number, find their address. and then email or call them and ask to speak with someone and meet with someone that handles foreign policy issues. Very responsive. Don't have to have a form email or a template conversation. Just say, I'm a constituent and I'd like to come in, next week, and talk about foreign policy issues and talk about the UN. So the first W of the 4 is who. Who are you? Hopefully you can organize a meeting with a collection of chapter members. It doesn't have to be everyone, but a group of 3, 4, or 5 is really effective. One person is also effective, but of course if you have 3 or 4, you can bring different perspectives and obviously increase the weight of your conversation and your argument. But first of all, when you go in and you have a meeting, the who is you're an American and you're a voter that supports the vital work of the United Nations. Very simple and very straight to the point. And as you've probably heard us say before, if you go into an office and say that, you're most likely the only person, unless you were there earlier this year, that's done it this year, or perhaps ever. So you're an American and a voter that supports the vital work of the United Nations. And why? Why do you care about the UN? You care about the UN because every year, and these are the stats we provide to you, every year the UN, with strong support from the US, provides food, as Chris mentioned, to 80 million impoverished people, assists over 60 million refugees fleeing war and violence, vaccinates 40% of the world's children, and helps keep the peace in some of the planet's most remote and dangerous conflict zones. Now, the UN, I think it's important to address, the UN, like any political body, is certainly not perfect, but it's clear that the work the UN does is directly in America's interests and helps advance our economic, foreign policy, and national security goals. And the legislation, this Cruz-Graham bill, would completely end that. It is, as we said, a complete defunding. There's no nuance about it. The UNHCR, WHO, IAEA, WFP, all completely gutted if this legislation became law. So you know who you are, why you're there, why you care, and what do you want? Your ask. What is it that you want? To maintain the work, the assistance, the critical work that the UN is doing, it's important that the U.S. remain engaged in the UN, and our main ask, obviously, is that the U.S. fully funds the UN. And you can say that this bill obviously completely does the opposite. To withhold our dues jeopardizes not only the UN's life-saving work, but perhaps even more importantly, and perhaps something that a staffer will react to even more, is this legislation and other legislation like it completely endangers our standing at the UN. And it may ultimately lead to us losing our vote in the General Assembly. And that would be disastrous, obviously, for our foreign policy, but also if the goal of this legislation is to safeguard Israel, as it is entitled, losing our vote in the General Assembly would be the opposite. So when do you want it? You obviously want it now, and you're there because the UN is under threat on the Hill right now. Whether it's the Graham-Cruz legislation that Jordy talked about, or any other of proposed bills that are coming out and kind of boiling up right now, and we've heard of several others in the House that are kind of in the works, similar or dissimilar. Any of these bills that would defund the UN because of something the Security Council did it would be disastrous and counterintuitive. And so it's not exaggerating to say that this is, without a doubt, the most important time in U.S.-UN relations in the last 8 years. And perhaps, I think, most importantly, wherever you come down on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, the Israeli-Palestinian issue, this bill is the wrong way, A, to reform the UN, and B, it's the wrong way to promote peace in the Middle East. So there's really no winners with this. So again, we're going to circulate these talking points to you, and you'll have them in email. But again, the 4 W's: who you are, why you care about the UN, what you want, and when you want it. Thanks, Mel.
Said like a good veteran. And I think there may be a few among us that haven't done an in-district meeting or met with a legislator, but they'll be few and far between, and you'll have company with other people that have done it before. we do have almost 30 minutes for discussion, and I'd like to make sure that people that have points to be raised are heard. If we can open the lines, if you can unmute your line if you wish to talk, identify yourself, please, and where you're from, and make your comment or question.
Hi, Mel. This is Karen. Karen Mulhauser. I live in the colony of D.C. and I can talk with my delegate Eleanor Holmes Norton, but she doesn't have a vote. I think that this call is probably the most important call that I've been on with UNA since I've been involved, because this is such a critical time. And I don't know how many people ultimately got on the call, but I will work with Paola, who offered to help do notes, to make sure that we have comprehensive notes that go out to maybe not just the advocacy leads, but also the chapter presidents, because this is so important. And I'm grateful for Jordy and Chris and Micah giving us the information, but it's perhaps that not enough of us are getting this information about how critical this is. And I think if we come out strong early on, advocating for funding for the UN, and if we are able to be successful, that will start the next year or 4 years out. Right. I wonder if Jordy or Micah have much of a sense of how successful this cruise bill might be.
Yeah, thanks, Karen. This is Jordy. I mean, it cuts both ways. Having Senator Cruz on it is a good thing. He's seen as extreme. He doesn't have close relationships with many members. He's kind of known as a one-man show. Likes kind of extreme bills and being able to grandstand, and doesn't have much of a legislative record in terms of getting things done because of that. So that's positive. The Graham makes it more more difficult given his role. I think he knows. I think he knows that this, I mean, we've talked with some Republican members. We're talking with Senator Rubio's office today, and he was saying, boy, this is kind of a bridge too far for us. So I think Graham knows that, and he certainly wants to make a statement. What I think is key here is for them, it might just be like kind of a negotiating position as well. We'll be entirely extreme and maybe we'll get a 50% cut or something like that. I think that's why it's really important for us to be out there and say, this bill is terrible legislation. It won't accomplish any of the things that you say it will. It will set all of those back, as Micah laid out, and have devastating consequences for millions of families, kids all over the world. But you have to understand the value of the UN, the importance of its important burden sharing element, and so I think it will be incumbent on us to kind of make the case, not only why this legislation is so bad, but also the value of the UN. So it's not like, oh, well, who cares what you're doing? And say, no, you don't understand. And this is, I would say, something about this that's so outrageous. I have at least been pleased that we will send around, but a number of articles that have been written, from the Israeli perspective of saying don't defund the UN, from more conservative voices, people who've worked in the George W. Bush administration, people who worked with Romney saying, my goodness, don't defund the UN. So it is kind of forcing people to come out and say, look, the UN matters, it is important. No, it's not perfect. So it is key for us again, not only point out the problem of this legislation, but the real value of the UN. And so, do I think this exact legislation could be passed? I mean, it's a difficult time. I don't think so, but I know that there are those who want to get as close to this line as really just kneecapping the UN, and we have really got to kind of fight against this.
Thank you, Jordy. I hear in what you're saying that we don't want to attack the members. We want to attack the contents of the bill as being inappropriate for helping the UN be effective and do its critical work. Because even like Mr. Graham, Senator Graham, he's been a friend, and we don't want to beat him up. We just want to say this is not the right bill to accomplish reform and accomplishing good things for the UN.
That's exactly right.
Okay. Other comments or questions? Please say who you are and where you're from.
Yeah, this is Herb Bairstock calling from Mexico to be on this call and the call last week as well. Thank you. I agree, of course, with Karen and all of you. We see the gravity of this. One thing in the toolkit and the timing wasn't entirely clear to me. Is there going to be an action alert, for example, for us to send an immediate message or make phone calls right now? The three time frames that you gave were meetings as soon as possible in the February to April timeframe, and then June, and then later in the fall for the budget. But in a way, it relates to Karen's thing. What's going to happen with this bill that's there now, and will there be something we should take action on right now? That was my first question, if I may. The second one is, we have these glossy blue and white kind of postcards that list some of these things, like the number of people vaccinated and the number of people getting food. And I was wondering whether there was a budget to get masses of those reproduced and updated and sent around to all the chapters to have at their events and to drop off at churches and clubs and give to the Rotary and everything else. That'd be a second one. The third thing is that I'm afraid that the chapter advocacy leads probably needs an update, and I've suggested this before. I don't know how many of the chapter leads are on now, but I would suggest maybe a separate email as soon as possible to be sure that you guys have the advocacy leads as well as all the presidents on these follow-up calls. And if I may address a question to you too, kind of the strategy issue, and that is, do people like Cruz and Graham and others who are talking about this kind of legislation argue that they think this will really work, that the UN will turn around, or what is it that they really expect the reaction will be? Or are they just playing games with the whole thing and using it as an excuse to politicize it and cut off funding? And what do we say to these people who are kind of living in la-la land?
Well, just some quick responses on that from my side. Herb, first of all, thank you for the reminder on what are the immediate things that we are sending out to all members. We have already sent out an immediate kind of click and respond, form email ask that's gone out to all of our members. The next thing that will hit, and it will hit imminently, so within the next 24 hours, will be a similar, call to action. Please call your members of Congress. So the first full membership email that we sent was focused on getting people to email their senators and their House members. The next one that you'll get in the next 24 hours will be about asking our members, just everybody, to call. So thank you for that. And in terms of timing, the timing is now. I mean, the Jordy was giving us, the play-by-play, because the people on this call are our experts. They're the folks who understand the appropriation cycle and that there are certain ebbs and flows in the congressional calendar. But on this, it is about ringing all the bells, mobilizing everything we got, and taking action now. So when you think of that MICA presentation, it's about how do you get out the door as soon as you possibly can. So the timing is now. The
And let
timing
me
is now in our outreach.
Yeah,
Go.
Chris, let me just follow up there, and just to drive home that point. I mean, I talked about this period February to April, but understand when Graham and Cruz did this. So what happened? So they just dropped legislation. It's just 2 of them, so that's good. It could have been 5 of them. It could have been 10 of them. But what they are doing right now is reaching out to their members and who are maybe not that familiar with the UN and saying, please sign on. If they don't hear anything from offices, it's a lot easier for a member to say, sure, I'll do that. And I can say this, as a former staffer, a few people commenting on a piece of legislation makes you think twice about doing something, particularly if it's something you may not care passionately about. If you don't hear anything, well, sure. So, I mean, this time frame, this February, I mean, it's repeated calls, telling your friends, going in. This is a vital time period, because if, a lot of people sign on to that bill, then that is a sign to Senator Graham when he is crafting the appropriations legislation. He really has 2 bites of the apple. He's got this bill. He also then will be in the room crafting legislation to fund the UN. He's like, look, I had all these members sign on. Clearly, there's a desire. If, on the other hand, he's hearing, like, people told me this is a terrible idea, and, I only had a couple people sign on to the bill, and that's a signal that he way overreached. So this, I mean, in the, these next weeks, months are absolutely vital to not just once, but for yourselves, for your friends to be going out. I mean, this is a really important time period of I would say, kind of 2 months, and that's the, yeah.
And just to add to that, your other points, Herb, we're going to be printing a lot of paper. We're going to be sending a lot of printed material. And one of the things I need is suggestions of what should be in those physical kits that we send out. So knowing that those blue cards are of value is really helpful. That's the kind of input I need. We're going to be spending resources on this. We'll figure out where we get them. So thank you for that. And then just the one on, do they really think that this is going to turn the tide? These are smart people. I think they realize that nothing you do to defund the UN is going to change Ambassador Rycroft, the British ambassador to the UN's vote at the Security Council, because they voted for it. There's no way to reverse that Security Council decision. This is about the political dynamics of the U.S.-Israel relationship and ensuring that you show outrage. And the UN is caught in the crossfire of this. It's a drive-by shooting that's happened, and the UN just got shot on the corner. So there, irrational arguments aren't going to carry the day. It's not that Ted Cruz and Lindsey Graham don't realize that this is a poor diplomatic strategy. It's that domestic politics trumps that.
This is Karen again, and Chris, I really appreciate those comments. And it occurs to me also that this is a time that we really do need to reach out not just to the advocacy leads, but to the chapter presidents and the all of our listservs, the National Council, and so forth. But I think that this might be a good opportunity for each of the chapters to reach out to their partners, and that's the third W that Micah mentioned, the what. And it may be that there's a whole lot of women's groups and a whole lot of environmental groups and a whole lot of peace and security groups that wouldn't otherwise be writing to their members of Congress about the UN, except we give them this opportunity. We show them that this is a hook for them to give their message about climate change or their message about gender equality. And so, I mean, I'd be happy to work with you about drafting some of that language that chapters could send out to their partner organizations at the local level, so that it's not just UNA members that are responding to this.
That's an excellent point, Karen. I mean, this affects, if you've got friends in Greenpeace and Sierra Club and, Human Rights Campaign and just any host of, and even sort of, middle or even conservative, people are concerned about international trade and business standards and all that kind of stuff, whatever it might be. This is across the board. So I think that's very insightful.
And it may just be that we can help the chapters by crafting some of the introduction language, making it as easy as possible for chapters to get the message out to their partners. Because I totally agree, we need to do this immediately over the next few weeks, and that can help strengthen our partner relationships for work down the road as well.
Excellent point. Thank you, Karen, and thank you, Herb, for raising it. I think that's exactly right. One of the foundational things that some of our new members may have some concerns about is, does the 501c3 get in the way of any of this? And I think a quick assurance that lobbying is one of the opportunities of a 501c3. It's not something that's prohibited or against the rules. Just there are a few people that were saying things that they were a little afraid that they might be going beyond what a 501c3 is supposed to be doing. We know it's right in line with things that we're supposed to do, but some of them need assurance.
No, I think that's a good point. And basically, all of this advocacy is about mobilizing individual Americans to share their voice for what they want in the democratic process. It's completely different than if you're a nonprofit and you want to hire lobbyists, and they're going to be registered lobbyists, and they perform a certain role in interacting with legislative staff. And 501c3s can do that as well, but it is within very strict boundaries. We do employ those people. One of those is on the line. Jordy is a registered lobbyist for the Better World campaign. And we live very strictly and report all of our expenditures and track it against our total expenditures with great precision and with lots of investment in, with law firms that track it all. But if you're a chapter out there and you're getting your volunteer leaders to go up and show it up at the Senate office, the district office in the town 20 miles away, or in the city where you are, and say that I'm an American and I belong to the United Nations Association because gender rights are global rights in my view, and I'm deeply troubled by this, and telling them exactly how you think that affects yourself and your whole community, that is nowhere close to the boundaries. That's just us exercising our democratic rights as individuals.
That's exactly right. I mean, this is Karen again, that the IRS limits on lobbying have to do with how much money you spend on it. And as individuals, if we're making contacts, that doesn't go against the chapter's lobbying limit. Or, if a chapter sends out emails, that's not a major expense. And so I hope that we're not going to shy away from being as assertive as we can on this issue, because this is a really critical time.
Excellent. Other questions or comments? Please identify yourself.
This is David Scotton, and I'm a member of the Washington NCA, and spent a lot of time on the Hill, worked in the White House and the UN and other issues. What I wanted to say is, at this point, they need co-sponsors. If they don't get co-sponsors on the bill, it's not going to go anyplace. So the important thing is to get to the senators from your state to get to their offices and say, we don't want any parts of this, because if they don't get the co-sponsors, it'll be referred to SFR or to approach foreign ops, but it's not going to go anyplace without a list of, some substantial co-sponsors.
Exactly. Yep.
Hi, this is Melissa, also with the NCA chapter, and I have a question for Jordy and Micah. I'm wondering what we know about the situation on the House side. It seems that at this point there's no companion bill, or that we know clearly that there is going to be one or not, but I'm curious if you've heard rumblings, if there's a possibility of somebody sponsoring this bill in the House. If so, what kind of support you think it might find there. Just be curious, any light you can shed on that.
Yeah, so thank you, Melissa. At this point, there's no exact companion bill. Just as you all know, often the House and Senate will pass companion bills, which will be similar. So there is not a related bill yet to this. Often, though, what happens is the Senate will do one, a House member will see that and be like, "That's a great idea. I'm going to do that." So that's again why outreach is critical. If you're meeting with members of Congress, there are similar bills out there to say, please do not support these types of bills. And then
on Monday, the Freedom Caucus met, which is the far right sort of Tea Party caucus in the House, and that is now led by Congressman Mark Meadows from North Carolina, who ironically was in his first term in office a UN General Assembly congressional delegate, and we've had some experience with him. We actually went with him to UN headquarters a couple years ago for a meeting with Secretary General Ban Ki-moon. So he knows us, and he actually knows the UN. The meeting with Freedom Caucus on Monday produced a piece of draft legislation that would doesn't go to the extent that the Graham-Cruz bill does. What it does is targets specific member states that vote against us at the UN and then rescinds our foreign aid. So you vote against us at the Security Council or the General Assembly, assumably, and whatever foreign aid you are receiving is then withdrawn. So it punishes member states directly for their votes. Try to use dollars as a diplomacy bargaining tool. So we haven't seen the text on that or exactly how far it will go, but we have heard about that piece of legislation.
This is Rita.
That's not going to get any traction.
Hello?
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 Go ahead, Rita.
Thank you. There are many issues at the top of the news at this point. Any calls that we're making to our senators or reps needs to get to the point of we're calling about quite quickly, because there's a confusion about whether the Russian link with Trump, etc., is needing an investigation. The CIA report. We have a new Secretary General. Hardly anybody has heard about that. We have to really focus on what we're actually dealing with now is a new piece of legislation, the Cruz-Graham, and exactly what points we can hit on that are in the news, as well as the well-being and indeed the very existence of the United Nations. I think it would be 20 years from now when we'd all look back and say we should have done as much as we could then. We didn't, and we are in deep trouble now. So let's realize this is a real turning point and try to get into the headline news as well as the funding question.
Good point, Rita. Other questions or comments?
This is Jenny in California. I just want to say one point on the marketing material. Whenever I speak with outside groups, often when I bring up the UN, they don't know all the different agencies. I've had people tell me they actually think the World Health Organization does more than the UN. And I've had to clarify this. So if we do something like even stickers on the back of it, putting all the different agencies, that way we can say, hey, you mind, representing, giving your support, and here are all the agencies that are under the UN. It'll do a lot to sort of to the outside UNA people on how much the UN really does.
Great input.
Yeah, helpful. I know that when we have questions, if we're preparing to go in district or respond or write a letter, I've got some models here. I know I've sent out that letter to our newspaper, and I've asked Kamala Harris for a meeting through her office, of course, but she's brand new to the body. I think that's actually an opportune time to get a hold of her. But I think if there were several requests, I'm thinking of Herb and Rita in the north, we can they'll get the message that people are really caring.
We're going to set up the same thing in the north, Mel.
I know you will, Herb. Other questions or comments tonight? We did have one agenda item that we were trying to get to if we had time, and that's coordinating with Genuine. Chris or Rachel, could you let us know if there's a way that we can do that better, or if they're just part of the electronic and social media effort?
Well, we've been thinking through a couple of different options on them. First of all, what I would say was really exciting is in that full membership call we had a week ago with Peter Yeo, where we only 24 hours notice. We had lots of Genuine chapter leaders on that call, and some of them we only had time for six questions, and we just picked 6 randomly, the first 6 up on the screen, and over half of them were Genuine. So our Genuine chapters are operating like normal chapters. They are, when I say normal chapters, just the community chapters and the versus the campus chapters. They are asking the questions of what's the timing, what do they need to get out, what's the messaging, how can they get out right now. So we are providing them the same materials we're providing you, same expectations, same sense of timing and urgency. The difference is that they've got some unique advantages in that on your campus, you have people from all over, depending on where your school is. You might have people from 50 states on campus. You might be able to convene people and take call to action, text to action, email to action efforts that are even beyond the geography of the state that you happen to reside in. So we are coming up with a strategy that will equip campus chapters to be able to, basically do tabling, but instead of tabling where you set up some brochures about the UN, where you're actually grabbing people as they walk by on campus and getting them to at that moment, pull out their cell phone and call their congressional delegation or text their congressional delegation. So kind of the same things where on the streets of Washington or New York, you get grabbed and someone tries to get you to make a contribution to a good cause. We just want you to give your voice in that moment to a good cause. And we've got a great intern who's just started with us who was the chapter president of our Michigan State University chapter up until she graduated this spring. She's helping us with that effort along with Anna, who leads the Genuine Network from the staff. So more to come on that.
Super. One of the things I wanted to touch before we signed off tonight was I would like to see us have monthly meetings now that the election cycle is done. Many of us were active in that. If there's a best time to coordinate with the leadership calls, I'd like to have our advocacy calls before the leadership calls each month so that we can report back to them and coordinate with them rather than try and catch up. So, Rachel, do you know when our next leadership call is? It's going to be the first.
They're always the first Tuesday of every month.
And this is Karen. Generally, the National Council has a call before the full leadership call.
And that's on the same day, but I think Mel is saying have
day.
It a few days before, right, Mel? Is that what?
So it may be that having an advocacy call on the Monday before the leadership call.
Yeah, and next month it'll be just before Members' Day.
Yeah, it will be on February 7th.
Okay. So if people are looking at a calendar, I'll encourage you to open your calendar if you haven't already. I'll ask, is there any preference between, say, Thursday, the February 2nd, or Monday, February 6th? Anyone can't make Thursday, February 2nd? Not hearing anyone, I'll say let's target February 2nd unless there's a compelling reason not to. And I want to thank again Jordy and Micah and Chris and Rachel and all of you for being on this call. I know the hours are long and some of you have been up for a long time. Any final comments or questions?
I have
Thank you all.
I have a question.
Go
This
ahead.
is Karen. I'm just curious how many chapters have actually identified an advocacy lead, and I know that we may learn more when we get the annual reports in another month and a half or so. But
Karen, you and Herb have your finger on the pulse. We need to fill in all those gaps. I can't answer that question directly right now, but we can't wait for the annual reports. We're going to have to push it now. We'll figure out what will need to be done by staffing and what we can rely on our regional reps to perhaps round up. We've got 160 chapters to contact, and we need to make sure that we have an informed, activated advocacy lead in each one. So that is a big outbound for us.
I'll sign up now to make some calls to help identify advocacy leads. This is why we're here. This is the core of why we exist as an organization. So let me know who I can call.
Thank you so much for that.
And Herb, may we ask you to help as well?
Sure.
From